My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 68 years old, and the day my wife's stepdaughter told me I was never her father, I answered her from the pulpit of our church. If you've never stood above 300 people in a space that's supposed to be holy, with your whole life hanging by a thread in your throat, let me tell you something. It's a strange kind of quiet. Grace Hill Baptist had never looked so full. Every pew was crammed with faces I'd known for decades: farmers in stiff suits, ladies from the quilting circle, the mayor and 2 councilmen in their best jackets, kids fidgeting in tiny bow ties. They'd come for a fairy tale wedding. Instead, they were staring at an old man with his hand on a microphone. The sanctuary smelled like lilies and furniture polish. Colored light from the stained glass windows painted the aisle in stripes of blue and gold. The organist's hands rested, frozen, on the keys. Even the ceiling fans seemed to have decided it was wiser not to move. At the front, Julie stood at the altar in a dress I could have put a down payment on a tractor with. Layers of lace spilled around her feet like a cloud trying to run away. She looked like every bridal magazine she'd ever left open on my kitchen table. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, her smile gone. She watched me the way a person watches a fuse burning toward dynamite. Her real father, as she liked to say these days, sat in the front pew on the bride's side. Ray Carlos, 50-something, sun-leathered, with a grin that had gotten him out of more trouble than it ever deserved to. His tuxedo didn't fit quite right, the sleeves were a little too long, the collar tugged at his neck. Beads of sweat clung to his temple. From where I stood I could see him shifting in his seat, like a man who suddenly realized his favorite bar stool was sitting on thin ice. My wife Linda was in the opposite pew, hands clenched so tight around her little silver clutch that her knuckles had turned the color of the wedding cake. She stared up at me with eyes full of pleading and fear. Her lips moved soundlessly. Knowing Linda, it was probably my name and God's in the same sentence for the first time in a while. Pastor Mark stood a step to my right, one hand still on his Bible, the other hanging useless. He had invited me up here as the father of the bride, to say a few blessings. That was 10 minutes ago. Now he looked like a man who'd opened the wrong door and found a tornado. Behind him Ethan, sweet, nervous Ethan. The groom, shifted from foot to foot, his smile long gone. He looked from Julie to me like he was watching a bridge he was already halfway across start to crack. The whispers started as soon as I took the pulpit. What is he doing? Is this part of it? He looks mad. A hissed, shh, rippled through the pews like wind through dry corn. Then silence fell again, thick enough to taste. I adjusted the microphone. It squealed, a hard, ugly shriek that bounced off the rafters and made half the room flinch. Somewhere near the back a child began to cry, then was quickly hushed. Other than that, nobody dared move. Last Sunday morning, in my own kitchen, Julie had looked me straight in the face, arms crossed over the sweatshirt I'd bought her for college, and said, "You were never my father. You're just my mother's second chance at a mortgage." It's funny how a whole quarter of a century of your life can get erased in a single sentence. I'd stood there with the coffee pot in my hand, watching the steam curl up between us, and it felt like somebody had taken a rubber stamp and slammed void across every birthday party, every late night pickup from school, every tuition check I'd ever written. Standing in that pulpit, those words echoed louder than the murmurs. I took a breath and let my hand rest on the worn edges of the wood. That pulpit had seen more than one preacher break down preaching funerals. It had never seen what I was about to do. Last Sunday, I said, my voice sounding older and steadier than I felt, my stepdaughter told me I was never her father. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. I saw Julie's shoulders lock. Ray's jaw twitched. Linda's eyes closed like maybe, if she couldn't see me, none of this would be real. She was right. I went on. I wasn't her father. I let that hang there just long enough for people to shift in their seats. Not the way she meant it. A few heads turned toward the bride. A few more turned toward Ray. Until this week, I said, I thought I had 3 children. Apparently I have 2 and 1 client. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Even the mayor swallowed hard. Ray looked down at his shiny shoes. For once that grin of his went missing. My eyes found him. He's the father she chose. I thought, not quite ready to put it into the mic. He spent decades running from consequences. Today the truth is going to run faster. Most of the folks in that building knew me as Quiet Dan from the co-op, the fellow who showed up early to set out communion cups and stayed late to stack chairs. They knew I'd retired a few years back from my job as auditor for the Mid-State Agricultural Cooperative. They didn't know that for 3 decades, when the numbers didn't add up, I was the man the board called at 2 in the morning. I spent 35 years as an auditor, I said. Not the kind that sits in a big city office. The kind that crawls through dusty file cabinets in grain elevators and feed mills, making sure the men and women who work this land don't get robbed by a bad ledger. They used to say Daniel Mercer never cooked a book and never let a lie stay standing. I was proud of that. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had held Julie's bicycle seat when she was 8, whitey-knuckled with fear of falling. Somewhere along the way, I said softly, I forgot that the same rules apply at home. People shifted again. They were starting to see this wasn't a rambling old man speech about love and happiness. This was something else. You all see a fairy tale wedding, I said, letting my gaze sweep over the flowers, the ribbons, the expensive hairdos. I see a ledger, and that ledger is covered in red ink and lies. At that a low, shocked murmur rose and died. Pastor Mark's hand tightened on his Bible. Ethan stared at me like a boy watching a storm form over his brand new house. Behind the murmurs, I could feel the question pressing in from every direction. What is he going to say? I didn't give them the answer. Not yet. I wasn't ready, and they weren't either. My eyes went back to Julie. Under the lace and the makeup, she still had the same freckle on the bridge of her nose she'd had when she was 10. The same chin that used to wobble when she tried not to cry. I thought of her standing in our kitchen, arms folded, spitting those words at me like poison. You were never my father. You're just the man who paid the bills. She had no idea how right and how wrong she'd been in the same breath. I heard Linda's whisper float up from the front pew, barely louder than a breath. Dan? Please, don't do this here. But there are some places where lies are heavier than the roof can hold. That old building creaked with them. I'm not up here to ruin a wedding just because my feelings got hurt, I said. I'm up here because there's more at stake today than a dress and a party. This isn't about my pride. It's about what's been done with the trust I gave this family. It's about what's been taken, and what might still be taken if I keep sitting quietly in the back pew. I let my hand tap the pulpit, 3 slow, steady knocks. Before I finish what I came here to say, I told them, this church will know exactly who has been cheating whom. A few people gasped outright at that. Someone coughed to cover it. I saw the head of the deacon's board lean forward, elbows on his knees, eyes suddenly sharp. But I didn't wake up one morning and decide to drag my family through the mud, I said. That's not who I am. That's not who I spent my life trying to be. I took one more long look at the faces in front of me. The shocked ones, the curious ones, the ones already judging me for daring to break the script. If you're going to judge me, I said quietly, you ought to know the whole story. You ought to know how a 68-year-old man, who thought he was done fighting for anything, got pushed far enough to let the truth speak in God's house. I stepped back from the microphone just enough to pull in a steady breath. The church felt like a pressure cooker, every eye, every held breath focused on me. So let me take you back, I said, my voice dropping into something softer, more tired. Back to the first time I met Julie. Back to the first time I decided to love another man's child as if she were my own. And in my mind, the stained glass and lilies faded, replaced by the sticky floor of a church fellowship hall 25 years earlier, where a skinny 10-year-old girl with 2 big glasses glared at me over a plate of baked beans and changed my life. When I first met Julie, she was 10 years old, suspicious, and clutching a styrofoam plate loaded with more baked beans than any child on earth could reasonably eat. It was a Wednesday night potluck in the dingy fellowship hall of Grace Hill. The fluorescent lights hummed. The punch was almost fluorescent itself, and some deacon's wife was murdering "How Great Thou Art" on the upright piano in the corner. I had been a widower for 3 years by then. My boys, Mark and Tyler, were 7 and 9. Running around under the folding tables with other kids, sticky-fingered and loud. I stood by the coffee urn doing what widowed men do at church events, smiling too much and pretending I felt less alone than I did. Linda was stirring the green bean casserole when I noticed her. She joined the church a few months earlier, always sitting 2 rows from the front, always slipping out quickly after the benediction with her daughter in tow. That night she looked tired in a way makeup couldn't cover, her hair pinned back with the kind of haste that tells you the day has been long. "Excuse me," I said, stepping around her to reach the salt. "You look like you know what you're doing with these things. Is that one safe?" She let out a quick, surprised laugh. "If you mean did I cook it, then yes. If you mean will it kill you, I make no promises." Her daughter stood slightly behind her, half-shielded, watching me with big brown eyes and a fierceness that didn't quite match the frilly dress. Linda squeezed her shoulder. "This is Julie," she said. "Julie, this is Mr. Mercer. He teaches your Sunday school class sometimes." Julie nodded once, stiff, and muttered, "Hi, Mr. Mercer," like she was being introduced to a parole officer, not a man offering her an extra dinner roll. For months after that I was Mr. Mercer. At first I thought it was just manners. Later I understood it was distance. Kids learn early what names can protect them from. Our courtship wasn't the dramatic movie kind. It was small things stacked up over time. I fixed Linda's leaky kitchen sink one Saturday afternoon because she mentioned it between services. While I was under the cabinet with a wrench, Julie stood guard with a flashlight like I might steal the pipes if she looked away. "Hand me that blue one," I said, pointing to the pliers. She narrowed her eyes. "Mom says not to touch your tools." "They're my tools," I said. "If you break them, I know where you live." For just a second, the corner of her mouth twitched. She passed me the pliers. Later, I sat at their small kitchen table, balancing Linda's checkbook while she apologized for the mess. Meanwhile, my boys played video games with Julie in the living room, shouting as if the world depended on pixelated race cars. I noticed the stacks of unpaid bills, the interest charges, the past due notices with Ray Carla's name still on half of them. "Your ex leave you with all this?" I asked gently. She stared at the table. "He left with promises," she said. "The bills stayed." I slipped a piece of paper toward her, a simple budget. "We can fix this," I said. "If you want help." "Why?" she asked. "You barely know us." Because I knew what it was like to look at 2 kids and wonder if you could keep the lights on until Friday. Because I knew what it meant to need somebody to show up and stay. But I just shrugged. "Because the math bothers me," I said. "And you make good green bean casserole." For a long time Julie hovered at the edges of all this. I sat on bleachers at her middle school band concert, clapping too loud when she played 3 hesitant notes on a clarinet. I tutored her in fractions at my kitchen table while my boys tried to distract her with faces through the glass door. "Why are you helping me?" she blurted one evening, frustration making her cheeks flush. "You don't have to." "I like numbers," I said. "And I like you? But I'm not yours," she muttered, looking down. I sat back, the pencil still in my hand. "You're right," I said. "You're not mine. Nothing in this world says I have to be here." She peeked up at me, testing. "I don't know much, kiddo," I added, "but I don't leave people I love." The first time she fell asleep against my shoulder was during a movie night at my place. My boys were arguing over whether to watch action or cartoons. We settled on something in the middle that didn't interest me at all. Halfway through, Julie's head tipped over and landed on my arm. I froze, afraid to breathe, afraid to move. For nearly an hour my arm went numb, and I have never been so grateful to be uncomfortable. We married in that same little church a year later. No string quartet, no designer gown, just Linda in a simple cream dress and me in the only suit I owned. My boys fidgeted as ring bearers. Julie walked her mother down the aisle, jaw set, eyes shining. When Pastor Mark asked if anyone objected, the silence felt heavy but hopeful. Ray didn't show. He sent a text to Linda 30 minutes before the ceremony. "Congrats. Wish I could be there. Car trouble. We'll make it up to Julie." I saw the message on her phone when she checked the time. She turned the screen face down and smiled at me anyway. We built a life the way poor people do, slowly, carefully, one responsible decision at a time. I kept working at the co-op, eventually becoming chief accountant. It wasn't glamorous. My office smelled like dust and coffee, not power. But the farmers trusted me. When drought came or prices dropped, they'd come sit in the chair across from my desk and say, "Dan, show me how bad it is," knowing I'd tell them the truth, even if it hurt. At home, every extra dollar had a destination. Some went to chipping away at the debts Ray had left on Linda's shoulders. Some went to braces when Julie's teeth started overlapping. Some went to summer camps she circled in glossy brochures, the ones with horseback riding and lake swimming. She'd leave them where I could see, pretending it was an accident. I always found a way. College was the big one. Linda cried when the first tuition bill came. Maybe she should just work, she sniffled. "I don't want you putting the house up for." "We'll manage," I said, signing the paperwork that used our home as collateral for a student loan package. I watched Julie twirl the dorm key on her finger later, laughing with her friends in the parking lot, and told myself it was worth every sleepless night. Ray showed up at the dealership when she bought her first used car, swaggering around like he'd arranged the whole thing. When it came time to sign, he patted his pockets. "Forgot my wallet," he said, chuckling. "Danny boy, you don't mind co-signing, do you?" For Julie. Linda looked torn. Julie looked hopeful. I signed. My own boys grew into men with less drama. Mark moved 3 states away, started his own family, sent photos of grandkids with my eyes. Tyler enlisted, then took a long-haul trucking job. They called on Sundays, visited when they could, never asked for more than a listening ear and the occasional loan they always paid back. Julie, though, always seemed to be one emergency away from disaster. A roommate who skipped out on rent, a class she had to retake, a job that wasn't a good fit. Linda would come to me wringing her hands. "She's trying, Dan," she'd say. "Ray may be a mess, but he's still her father. Don't make her choose between you." I didn't want her to choose, so I opened my wallet instead. Every few years, like clockwork, Ray would drift back into town on a cloud of half-truths. He'd call Linda late at night, voice full of regret. "Lost my job, Lynn. This new boss, he's got it out for me. Just need a little help with the truck payment till I get back on my feet. Julie worries. You know." At first, Linda slipped him 20s out of her own purse without telling me. Then it became hundreds from savings. When I found out, I confronted her, but the tears came fast. "I just don't want Julie to hate me," she sobbed. "She lights up when he calls." I thought if I helped him, he'd show up more. Reverend Mark caught me pacing in the parking lot after one of those fights. He leaned against his old Ford and watched me wear a groove in the gravel. "Dan," he said finally, "you can't buy someone's love. You can only give it." "I know," I muttered, "but maybe if I just keep showing up." "Forgiveness is holy," he said. "Enabling is not." I nodded like I understood, but in my heart I still believed time and consistency would turn Julie's gratitude into something like loyalty. Her high school graduation was one of the best days of my life. She crossed the stage in a blue gown, honor cords swinging, and when they handed her the diploma, she turned to the crowd and waved, calling, "Love you, Dad," directly at me. My chest hurt in the best way. After the ceremony, she dragged me over to her friends. "This is my dad," she said proudly. "He's the reason I made it here." I almost didn't notice Ray staggering up behind us, shirt untucked, smelling like beer and cologne. "Hey, baby girl," he boomed, pulling her into a clumsy hug. "Your old man is proud of you." He shoved himself into every photo after that, grinning wide, elbow on my shoulder like we were buddies. I let it slide. Julie was too happy for me to ruin it. The years blurred into a pattern. Paychecks came, bills went, and whenever Ray's shadow fell across our threshold, Linda's spine melted into guilt and nostalgia. I set up a small life insurance policy in all 3 kids' names. Equal shares, because fairness mattered to me. I told the agent, "Julie's the one who'll look after us when we're old. She lives closest." One afternoon, sitting at the dining room table, I signed an amendment to a savings account, adding Julie as a beneficiary, to make things easier if something happens. Linda smiled, relieved. "She'll take care of us," she said. "You'll see," I believed her. I believed the girl who'd fallen asleep on my shoulder and called me dad in front of the whole school would never weaponize that trust. I slid the signed papers back across the table, unaware that I'd just given a hurting child the sharpest knife in the drawer. Julie was 24 the first time she threw those words at me like a stone. I can still feel where they landed. She had moved back to town after college, degree half finished and loan payments fully due. At first she stayed with us, for a few months, while she got settled. A few months turned into a year, then two, with a rotating cast of boyfriends and short-lived jobs. Eventually she moved into a small apartment across town with a young man named Kyle who liked craft beer and talking about his ort. One Tuesday evening, I sat at our kitchen table with a yellow pad, a calculator, and Julie's stack of bills. She'd brought them over in a shoebox, eyes wide and wet. "I'm drowning, Dan," she had said, dropping the box on the table. "They're calling me every day. I can't sleep." She'd lost her latest job at a boutique after showing up late one too many times and blamed it on toxic management. The student loan people didn't seem moved by that explanation. We went through the statements one by one. Rent late notices, credit cards from places I didn't recognize, a student loan balance that made my stomach knot, sitting there like a second mortgage on a life that hadn't really started. "Okay," I said finally, rubbing my temples. "I can help you catch up on these three. The others will call and set up payment plans. But starting next month, you have to tighten things up. No more weekends in Nashville, no more online shopping at midnight." She sat across from me in one of Linda's old sweatshirts, nails painted a glossy deep red that probably cost more than my haircut. For a moment she looked like the little girl at my table learning fractions again, vulnerable and open. "That's it?" she asked. "Just cut back. You have to start somewhere," I said. "Look," I slid the pad toward her. "If you skip 2 of these trips and stop eating out as much, you can put that money straight onto the loans. You're not broke, Julie. You're leaky." She stared at the numbers, then at me, and something shifted in her eyes. The gratitude I was used to seeing there drained out, replaced by something sharper. "You don't get to tell me how to live," she snapped. I blinked. "I'm not telling you how to live. I'm telling you how math works. Same thing I've done for everybody at the co-op for 30 years. She pushed the pad away like it smelled bad. "You're not my real dad, Dan," she said, each word precise. "You're the man Mom settled for so we wouldn't lose the house. That doesn't give you the right to run my life." The kitchen went very still. The refrigerator hummed. Outside somewhere, a dog barked. Inside, I felt something old and fragile crack down the middle. "I didn't say I was running your life," I managed. "You brought these bills to me. You asked for help." "I asked for money," she shot back. "Not a lecture." For a second the mask slipped and I saw what lay underneath: fear, shame, desperation. Then her chin jutted out again and it was gone. Linda came in halfway through the silence, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What's going on in here?" she asked, looking from Julie's flushed face to my pale one. "Nothing," Julie said quickly, scooping the bills back into the box. "Just Dad trying to control everything again," she said. Dad, in that sweet tone she used on Linda, the one that made me sound like a fussy old uncle instead of the man she'd just demoted. Linda chuckled uncertainly. "Dan just worries," she said. "Don't take it so serious." Julie left with the shoebox and a check from me anyway. Later that night there was a knock on my door. She stood there, eyes rimmed red. "I'm sorry," she mumbled. "I'm just stressed. I shouldn't have said that." I wanted to believe her. I hugged her. I told myself it was the debt talking, not my girl. But over the next few months, little pieces of that apology kept falling off. She started spending more time with Ray. He'd come drifting back into town with stories about some new contracting job out of state. A big opportunity if only the bank would quit riding him. They'd sit on Linda's porch, laughing too loud, sharing beers while I watched from the kitchen window. One evening Julie came in glowing from one of those visits. "Ray says real fathers don't keep score," she announced, dropping her purse on the table. "They just help when their kids need them." "Does he?" I asked. "Did he say that before or after he asked you for gas money?" She rolled her eyes. "He doesn't have to prove anything to you, Dan. Money doesn't buy love." Interesting philosophy from a man who hadn't bought a single birthday present in a decade. Still, whenever the rent was a week late or a loan payment loomed, she called me, not him. "Mom doesn't have it," she'd say. "Ray's waiting on a check." You're the only one I can count on. I told myself this was proof of our bond. I didn't stop to ask why that bond always seemed to be paid in dollars. The first time inheritance came up, it was over meatloaf on a Sunday. We should make sure Joel gets something extra, Linda said, cutting her slice with unnecessary care. The boys have their own lives. She doesn't have anyone else to fall back on. I set my fork down. She has us, same as they do, I said. When I'm gone, whatever's left gets split 3 ways. No favorites. That's the only way this works. Linda pursed her lips but didn't argue. Julie, stirring her mashed potatoes into little piles, didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I saw the way her eyes flicked toward the old sideboard where I kept our important papers. At church one month we had a fundraiser for the leaky roof. I wrote a check quietly, folded it, and slipped it into the plate as it passed. I'd always preferred to give without fuss. Ray strutted up to the front at the end of the service, slapped a crumpled 50 on the table, and made sure everyone saw. Times are tight, he said loudly. But we gotta support God's house, right? Afterward, in the fellowship hall, Julie wrapped her arm around his. Isn't he amazing? She gushed to a little cluster of women. Dad always gives, even when he doesn't have much. Not like those old folks who just sit on piles of money and never share. She glanced over at me when she said it. Laughed. They laughed with her. It landed in my chest like a nail. Then came the health scare. I was in the middle of balancing the co-op's quarterly statements when my heart kicked like a stubborn mule. The room tilted. Next thing I knew, I was lying in a hospital bed with beeping machines and a nurse taking my blood pressure. It was a flutter, the doctor said, later. Nothing catastrophic, but you're not 20 anymore, Mr. Mercer. You need to slow down. Linda fussed over me, fluffing pillows, adjusting blankets. Julie stood at the foot of the bed, arms folded, trying to look brave and failing. Don't you dare die before you finish paying off my loans, she joked. Linda let out a strained laugh. The nurse chuckled politely. But in that little silence right after, before anyone changed the subject, I heard the truth ringing like a bell. Back home, alone in my recliner with a pill organizer on the side table, I started to wonder for the first time if I was loved as a person or as a provider. I told myself Julie was scared, that she used humor the way people use umbrellas in storms. But the question sat there in the dark, blinking. A few weeks later, I came home early from the hardware store and heard Julie's voice float down the hallway from the guest room. She thought the house was empty. I stopped without thinking. I'm just saying. She was telling someone on the phone. If Dan croaks first, Mom will be comfortable. The house is in his name, the accounts, all that. If Mom goes first, I have to find a way to keep him sweet. He could decide to give it all to those boys. A pause. Then a laugh. No, he's not that petty. But you never know. Old people get weird. My stomach turned. I moved away quietly, not ready to let her know I'd heard my death discussed like a line item on a budget. The next clue came more plainly. One Sunday after lunch, Julie was looking for her keys. Her purse had spilled open on the couch. As I bent to pick up a lipstick, a folded packet of paper caught my eye. My name was on the top line. It was a photocopy of my will. I recognized Pastor Mark's office letterhead from the day we'd reviewed it together. Across the margins, in Julie's handwriting, were little notes. Ask Mom about changing executor. Can he leave house directly to us? Taxes if we sell. There was a question mark next to the line that listed my life insurance policy, and under it, in red ink, the words, "Is this all?" I set the papers back exactly where I'd found them and walked into the kitchen, my heart pounding for a different reason than the last time. I didn't say anything that day. Not to Julie. Not to Linda. I smiled through dessert and asked about work and listened to Ray's latest grand plan over the phone that evening. But something had shifted inside me. For the first time in 25 years, the man who never ignored a discrepancy at work realized he'd been ignoring one at home. The numbers weren't adding up, and the problem wasn't interest rates or bad weather. It was motive. That night, long after Linda went to bed, I pulled the fireproof box from the closet and set it on the table. I opened the lid, laid out every deed, policy, and statement like pieces of a puzzle. If Dan croaks first. The phrase rolled around my head, sour and heavy. I'd spent decades saving other men's farms from bad math. It was time to see exactly what kind of equation my own family had been writing with my name. When Ethan asked Julie to marry him, the whole church treated it like a Hallmark movie had come to life. He did it on the front steps after service, in front of the stained glass window, knees creaking as he knelt with the ring. People clapped, some cried. Ethan was a good kid, decent, hardworking, assistant manager at the feed store, sang bass in the choir. The kind of young man you hope your daughter will notice. Julie squealed, threw her arms around his neck, and said yes so loud it echoed off the bell tower. Then she turned, still clutching him, and looked straight at me. "We have to have it here, Dan," she said breathlessly. "At Grace Hill. This is home. It's where you married Mom, where I grew up. It'll mean so much to everyone." For a moment, my heart warmed. I saw a little girl again, twirling in the fellowship hall in her Easter dress. "Of course," I said. "We'll talk to Pastor. We'll figure it out." What I didn't realize then was that "we'll figure it out" meant you'll pay for it, and we'll decide how grateful to be. Within a week, Pinterest boards materialized on Julie's phone like mushrooms after rain. She showed Linda photos of flower arches and string quartets and wedding planners whose fees could buy a used truck. "Don't worry, Mom," she said one night over dinner, scrolling through her screen. "Dan wants this. Right, Dan? You've been saving for our weddings." I had saved. Not for this exactly, but for something quieter. A cake in the fellowship hall, maybe a simple dress, a potluck reception like we'd had. But I just nodded, chewing my meatloaf a little longer than usual. "Sure," I said. Within reason. Reason, I learned, was a flexible word. A few weeks later, Linda asked if I could meet her and Julie at Pastor Mark's office to talk about the future. She said it lightly, but her eyes didn't match her tone. "What future?" I asked. "Our future," she said. "Yours, just come please." Pastor's office smelled like old books and coffee grinds. He'd straightened his desk, pushed a plate of cookies toward us, and looked like a man caught in the middle of a family argument he didn't want. Julie had a folder on her lap, thick with printed pages and neon sticky notes sprouting like weeds. She smiled too wide when I sat down. "We've been doing some research, Dan," she began. "Online. And Ethan's cousin is paralegal," she gave us some pointers. "We just want to make sure you and Mom are protected as you get older." I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. "Protected from what?" "From scammers," she said quickly. "From making mistakes. You know how it is. People target seniors. If something happens, we need to make sure Mom is secure, and that nobody can take advantage of you." She slid a set of documents across the desk toward me. The title on the first page read Famille Trust Pavier off Attrdy. This would put the house and a couple of accounts into a trust, she explained, tapping the paper with a manicured nail. "You'd still live there, of course. We'd just be able to manage things. Pay bills. Sign if you're in the hospital. That kind of thing. For your protection." I looked at the language. It was dense, full of her and afters and wherefores. My name appeared over and over in phrases like grantor and incapacitated. Underagents. Linda's name and Julie's name were neatly typed, side by side. "Who drew this up?" I asked. Julie smiled. "A friend." She said most families do something like this. "Right, Pastor?" Pastor Mark cleared his throat. "A lot of folks appoint someone they trust, yes," he said carefully. "But it's always the individual's choice. No one should feel rushed." Julie forged ahead. "We're just thinking ahead," she said. "You've been forgetful lately." She glanced at Linda. "Like the time you double paid the light bill. And when you totally missed the potluck and brought your casserole a day late." Linda let out a nervous laugh. "He did do that?" she said. "Showed up to an empty hall with a hot dish." They both looked at Pastor like that settled it. Julie pulled out another sheet, an article printed from some medical website, with phrases circled in red. "Early cognitive decline," she read. "Difficulty managing finances, repeating stories, losing track of dates." She didn't say, "We're worried you're losing your mind." But she didn't have to. "I made one extra payment," I said slowly. "I caught it myself and called the company. And I got the potluck date wrong by one day. That doesn't make me incompetent. It makes me human." "We're not saying you're incompetent, Dan," she said, folding her hands in that patient way you use with small children. We're just trying to be proactive. It's not about money. It's about peace of mind.
Right, Mom.
Linda looked at me, then at the papers, then at Pastor. She just worries, Dan, she said softly. We both do. With your heart thing, it scared us. If something happened, I wouldn't even know where to start. Pastor Mark shifted in his chair. Daniel, he said, his voice low, we can talk about this separately if you like. You still seem very capable to me. Julie's jaw tightened at that, but she kept her smile. Of course he is, she said. We're not taking anything away from him. We're just streamlining things, so he doesn't have to stress. Right, Dan? Don't you want less stress? I didn't sign that day. I took the folder home to think about it. Julie's smile cooled 2 degrees. A week later, I went to the bank to renew a CD. The girl at the counter, who'd known me since she was in pigtails, pulled up my account, then hesitated. Mr. Mercer, she said. There's a note here that your family is helping you manage things now. Something about new paperwork coming. I felt my face heat. My family. She winced. I shouldn't have said anything. It's just a flag on the account. Nothing's changed yet. But if that power of attorney gets filed, legally your daughter and wife can move things around for you. Just so you know. I left the bank with my CD untouched and a stone in my stomach. That month, when my statement arrived, there was a new automatic transfer listed. $200 from my savings into Linda's personal checking, labeled household support. We had never set up such a transfer. When I asked her about it, she stared at the sink. Oh, Julie helped me with the online banking, she said. She said it was silly for me to keep asking you every time I needed grocery money. This way it's automatic. You don't have to worry. The more I questioned, the more worry became their favorite word. At church, I started noticing how people talked to me. They repeated things twice. They spoke slowly, hands touching my arm as if I might fall over. Feeling okay today, Dan? The head usher asked, too brightly. You remember we moved Sunday school to the other building, right? Julie mentioned you've had some memory stuff. One of the choir ladies whispered, eyes full of syrupy concern. Bless your heart. Julie weaponized my own quietness against me. If Dad melts down publicly, people will think he's losing it. I overheard her telling Linda in the kitchen one afternoon, we have to keep him from embarrassing himself. For his sake. They told the pastor I was getting confused. They told the bank I needed help. And every time I pushed back, I became the unreasonable one. We're not stealing from you, Dan, Julie said one evening, her hand on my arm like a nurse. We're protecting you. From yourself. Funny, I said. I managed $30 million worth of grain contracts without losing the barn. But now I'm not fit to pay the light bill. Linda flinched. Don't be cruel, she murmured. You know how your dad forgets things sometimes, Pastor. She'd said just last week in Mark's office, as if I weren't sitting right there. The worst was the isolation. At potlucks I'd catch snippets. Julie says he's been slipping. So sad. He looks fine to me, but you never know. It was like watching your own obituary circulate before you'd even taken your last breath. The breaking point came 2 months before the wedding. I went into Linda's sewing room to look for the tape measure and found a clipboard on the ironing board. On top of it was a document with my name in bold. Diurl pub orafatiduarney. My eyes skimmed the lines. I saw broad authority, banking transactions, real estate, healthcare decisions. I saw Julie's name and Linda's name listed as co-agents. At the bottom, a blank line waited patiently for my signature, with a sticky note over it that read in Julie's neat handwriting, "Sign here, Dan. We'll take this to the notary after Bible study." I stood there, tape measure in one hand, feeling the floor tip under me. From the kitchen, carried down the hallway by the air conditioner, came the murmur of voices. We need him to sign it before the wedding, Julie was saying. Once everything's set up and the bills are paid, we'll be fine. If he throws a fit after, people will just say it's his condition. Linda whispered something I couldn't catch. Mom, Julie hissed, a little sharper. Once the wedding's paid for and the house is safe, he can yell all he wants. The papers will be signed. I stood in the doorway of the dark hallway, not daring to breathe, letting their words soak in. I had spent my life auditing other people's books. going line by line, page by page, until the truth came out and the numbers made sense. Listening to my wife and the girl I'd raised talk about locking me out of my own life, I realized this was just another accounting problem. It was time to audit my own family. I didn't go to a lawyer first. I went to a woman who still believed numbers answered to God. Her name was Martha Reyes. She was in her early 60s, sharp as vinegar and twice as cleansing. For 30 years she'd kept the books at the co-op, back when I was still the junior man with ink on my fingers. When she retired, she slid into volunteering as church treasurer like it was the most natural thing in the world. If a penny went missing from Grace Hill's missionary fund, it woke Martha up at night. I called her on a Thursday afternoon. "Martha, it's Dan," I said. "You got a minute for a stubborn old fool?" "Depends," she said. "You bringing coffee?" "Blue thermos," I replied. "Then I've got more than a minute. Come on over." Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon and strong brew. The table was the same scarred oak she'd balanced ledgers on for decades. Little scripture verses were taped under the clear vinyl cover, yellowed at the edges. Her husband was out in the yard tinkering with something noisy, bless him. Inside, it was just us and the quiet tick of the wall clock. I spread my stack of papers between the salt and pepper shakers, 3 months of bank statements, the draft power of attorney, and a photo I'd snapped of Julie's wedding budget notes lying on the counter. Martha didn't launch into sympathy. She put on her reading glasses, took a sip of coffee, and started in on the numbers without a word. "Linda's account," she murmured, tracing a finger down a column. "Regular deposits from your pension, I see. Nothing unusual there. But what's this?" She tapped a line I'd glossed over: ATM withdrawals in odd amounts, 2 or 3 times a week, always labeled case. "Those are for Julie's emergencies," I said. "According to Linda." "Huh," Martha said. "Emergencies must like Friday nights and nail salons." She moved on to my savings statement. "Here we go," she said quietly. "Automatic transfer to Linda's checking. Set up 2 months ago." "I never authorized that." "I know," she said. "I watched you sign your name for 30 years. If you'd set this up, you'd have a note about it in 3 different places." She set my statements aside and picked up the power of attorney draft. Her brow furrowed deeper with each paragraph. "Good grief," she said. "Who wrote this? A vulture." She looked up at me. "Dan, this isn't a help with the bills paper. This would let them sell your truck, your house, and your kidneys if they could find a buyer." I thought I was overreacting. I admitted. "Julie says it's standard. For my protection." Martha snorted. "Protection, my foot. You're not confused, Daniel. You're being positioned." She said it so flatly that something in my chest loosened. "Guardianship, power of attorney. Good tools in the right hands," she went on. "But in the wrong hands, they're cages. I've seen it. Someone gets labeled forgetful, and next thing they know, they're signing away the front porch." I watched her flip to the last page, where my signature line waited, blank. "You didn't sign this," she said. "Not yet." "Good." She stacked the sheets, squared them like a deck of cards, and pushed them away from me like they were dirty. "Now," she said, "tell me about Ray's new construction company." I handed her the printout from the online business registry. She tilted her head. "Registered 6 months ago," she murmured. "Address is a P.O. box at the UPS store. No website, no contractor's license number. But I've seen his name on some checks at church." My stomach dropped. "Checks." She pulled a separate folder from a side drawer. "Church disbursement reports." "I can't show you everything," she said. "Confidentiality and all. But your name is on this one." She slid a photocopy in front of me. It was a check from the Church Benevolence Fund, made out to Carlisle Home Services. Signed by Martha on one line and countersigned by Linda on the other. Note says, "Urgent plumbing repair at widowed member's home," Martha said. "Mount $1,200. "I never heard about a widow with a busted pipe," I said. "That's because the widow seems to live in Ray's imagination," she replied. I called around when the invoice came in. No one knew anything. My hands clenched around the edge of the table. Martha wasn't done. "And here," she said, flipping to another page. 2 transfers from the discretionary missions fund to the same account. Reason listed as roof patching at parsonage. But the parsonage roof hasn't leaked since we re-shingled it in 15. You oversaw that job yourself. Linda signed those. I asked, my voice coming out smaller than I liked. She did, Martha said. And I'll bet my best casserole dish she did it after a long, Terry talk from your stepdaughter about helping Dad get back on his feet. The betrayal wasn't just theoretical anymore. It was ink and dates and numbers, marching across the page like a confession. I felt sick. Dan, Martha said gently, this isn't absent-mindedness. This is a pattern. They're moving money from anywhere they can reach your accounts, church accounts, life insurance. Does Linda know exactly what Ray's doing? Maybe not, but she's helping him do it. That's the part that hurts. I swallowed. Life insurance. She hesitated, then pulled another sheet from her bag. I was balancing the memorial fund, she said, and saw a deposit into the wedding account, earmarked as family gift. It matched exactly the payout from that small policy you took on yourself years ago. The one supposed to go equally to the boys and Julie if well. I remembered the day the check came, the way Linda had said, it'll make the wedding so much easier, and how I'd been too numb from the hospital stay to argue. Julie convinced her to borrow it. Martha said softly. Said she'd pay it back. But you and I both know that money's gone. Straight into toll and deposits and Ray's investments. I tried to joke, because that's what I do when the room starts spinning. I raised a girl who thinks I'm an ATM with dentures, I said, staring at the numbers. That's on me. Martha reached across the table and smacked the back of my hand lightly with her pencil. Don't you dare take all of this on yourself, she said. They're grown. They're making choices. You gave. They took. Those are two different verbs. She leaned back, took off her glasses, and rubbed the bridge of her nose. You need more than my outrage, she said. You need someone who can swing a hammer in the legal world. I can't afford fancy lawyers, I muttered. You can't afford not to talk to this one, she replied. Her name's Carla Ungayan. Elder law attorney, knows her stuff, sits in the back left pew at 8 o'clock service every week. I'll call her. You'll bring these papers. We'll let her tell you how bad it really is. And the church money? I asked. Martha's jaw tightened. I'll handle that, she said. Quietly for now. I'll pull every record that has Ray's name within sniffing distance. If they've been using the Lord's house as a cash machine, we'll know. 2 days later I sat in a cramped office above the hardware store. The kind of place with law books older than I was lining the walls. Carla was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with sharp eyes and a calm voice that made people spill things. She paged through the power of attorney, the bank statements, the church check copies Martha had flagged. Okay, she said eventually, setting the stack down. First of all, Mr. Mercer, you're not incompetent. You tracked down more irregularities in 2 weeks than some of my clients' families notice in years. Second, this document, she tapped the paw, is a loaded gun pointed at your own head. If you sign it, you won't just lose control. You might take the fall for what they've already done. I asked. Once they're your legal agents, any shady transfer they make can look like your decision, she said. If the church decides to sue for misused funds, or the bank questions withdrawals, guess whose name is on the line, not Julie's. Yours. I felt the room tilt again. So what do? I managed. Step 1, she said, ticking points off on her fingers. Do not sign anything they put in front of you. Ever. Step 2, we quietly revoke any existing powers of attorney you might have out there. Step 3, you get a letter from your doctor stating you're of sound mind. If they try to rush a guardianship, that letter becomes your shield. And the house? I asked. The accounts. Can they take them? Not without your signature or a court order, she said. And courts don't like being used for family squabbles if they can help it. Especially when the confused elderly man is balancing the judge's checkbook better than he can. She smiled a little. You're not powerless, Mr. Mercer. You've just been too polite. Martha, who had insisted on sitting in, slid one more page across the desk. Show him this, she said. Carla glanced at it, then handed it to me. It was a simple ledger line from the church's online system. Donation D. Mar CER roof bar fund in $500 reallocated at J. Carlisle's request to Wedding expenses, floral deposit. I stared at the arrow, the tiny notation beside my name. She moved it. I whispered. My offering. Came to me with big eyes. Martha said grimly. Said you'd told her it was fine, that you'd rather it go toward keeping the church beautiful for the wedding. I should have called you. That one's on me. She literally redirected my tithe to herself, I said, astonished by the cold efficiency of it. Martha reached over and squeezed my wrist. You're not crazy, Daniel, she said. You're the only sane one in a room full of people drunk on entitlement. Carla leaned forward, folding her hands. I'll help you, she said. I'll draft revocations, file notices with the bank, gather what we need to protect you. But I need you to understand something. If we pull this thread, you might lose more than money. You might lose what you thought your family was. I looked at the stack of papers, at my own name, twisted and bent on forms I'd never seen. I think I already lost that, I said. We're just catching up on the paperwork. She nodded once. They're dragging you into this church to bless their lies, she said. Maybe the church should hear the truth instead. That thought sat between us, heavy and dangerous. Martha's eyes flicked from her to me, wary but curious. Later that afternoon, after the legal talk and signatures and promises of next steps, I slipped into Grace Hill through the side door. The sanctuary was empty except for a few motes of dust dancing in the colored light. The organ was dark. The altar flowers from Sunday were starting to droop. I sat in the very back pew, the one that had become my spot, and stared at the pulpit. I imagined myself standing there on Julie's wedding day, not with a blessing, but with a ledger. I'd always sworn I'd never embarrass my family in public. That was a line I thought I'd never cross. Then I realized they'd already done that to me in private. I folded my hands on the back of the pew in front of me, not sure if I was praying or just steadying myself. If the truth was going to speak, this was where it had to do it. Carla's office became our war room. It didn't look like much, just a narrow space above the hardware store with mismatched chairs and a humming window unit. But that little room held more firepower than anything Ray and Julie could stack in their favor. On one wall hung her law degree. On the other, a framed Bible verse about justice rolling down like waters. She hadn't put them together by accident. She spread my papers out in a neat grid, bank statements, church reports Martha had pulled, the draft power of attorney, a copy of my will. Martha sat to my left, pen poised like a weapon, glasses low on her nose. I felt like I was back at the co-op, except this time the failing business was my own household. Let's start with goals, Carla said. We're not flailing. We're going to move with purpose. She ticked them off with her fingers. First, we secure your assets and revoke anything that gives them dangerous authority. Second, we document every misuse of funds we can prove. Third, we let them show us exactly what they intend to do. No guessing. Fourth, we make sure when the truth comes out, the church and the law are ready. I nodded, feeling that old familiar click of strategy settling into place. Numbers, plans, contingencies. That language I understood. Step one is easy, she went on. Your will. Right now, Julie is the executor, correct? I grimaced. Thought it would make her feel trusted. And it did, Martha muttered. A little too much. Carla slid a new document across the desk. We changed that, she said. Your eldest son becomes executor. The estate splits 3 ways as you intended, but we add a clause. Julie's share is held in trust, contingent on her not being under investigation for financial wrongdoing involving you or the church. That'll make Thanksgiving fun, I said. Think of it as encouragement, Carla replied dryly. Next, we revoke any existing POA. We register a new, limited one with the county. It only activates if you're medically incapacitated. And your son and I are co-agents. Not Linda. Not Julie. I hesitated. Linda will see that as betrayal. She already betrayed you, Dan, Martha said quietly. We're just updating the paperwork to match reality. I signed where Carla indicated, my handwriting steadier than I expected. With every stroke, a little weight lifted. Now documentation, Carla said. Martha pushed forward a thin stack of church reports. Here we have 3 checks, she said, tapping each. All to Ray's so-called construction company. 2 marked as benevolence, 1 as repair. No corresponding work orders. Here, she slid another page, Your roof fund donation rerouted to the wedding account at Julie's request. And here, a final sheet. Julie's signing as authorized on a disbursement. The bylaws say any reallocation over $200 requires your sign-off as the primary donor. I don't see your initials anywhere. Carla's eyes hardened. That's misuse of designated funds at best. Fraud at worst, she said. The church could press charges if they chose. I swallowed. They did it in God's name, I said. That's the part that twists my gut. Carla nodded once. It should. She opened a thin manila folder of her own. A's for Ray, she said. I had an assistant run his name. He's got tax liens in 2 counties, a couple of small claims judgments from subcontractors, and 1 lawsuit pending over a deck that collapsed when he skipped proper permits. His company is broke and he's using church money and your retirement as life support. So all his talk about a big opportunity. I began. Isaiah, she finished. He needs this wedding. The Prescott-style fantasy without the Prescott money. If it collapses publicly, his last good mark dries up. That was where the plan started to form, not out of revenge, but out of leverage. You can't just hide and hope they stop, Carla said. Hoping is not a legal strategy. You need to confront this before they get you declared incompetent or trick you into signing their version of that POA. I don't want to drag my family through mud, I said. Especially not in front of the whole town. Martha leaned in. They swore to honor you, Dan, she said. They broke that long before you ever stepped up to the pulpit. This isn't you hurting them. This is you finally saying no. Carla gave me a considering look. They're going to use this wedding, she said. Use the church. Use your name in their speeches about how grateful they are for family. If they insist on staging their little play in front of God and everyone, maybe that's exactly where the truth needs to show up. The idea made my stomach twist. But it also made a cold kind of sense. We spent the next hour mapping steps. Quietly, I visited Pastor Mark in his office. We closed the door. I laid out the documents on his desk, the church checks, the misdirected donation, the fake invoices, the POA. He read slowly, lips moving along with the numbers. When he finished, he sank back in his chair, took off his glasses, and rubbed his face. Lord of mercy, he whispered. I knew Ray was trouble. I didn't know he'd crawled into our offering plates. I don't want to split the church, I said. But I can't stand in front of that altar and play along. He sat forward. Daniel, he said, voice firm despite the shock, this congregation belongs to Christ, not to Julie, not to Ray, not even to you. If sin is standing under these rafters wearing lace and a rented tux, pretending to be something else, then the worst thing we could do is bless it. I'm not asking for a witch hunt, I said. I'm just asking not to be gagged when the time comes. He looked me in the eye. If you feel led to speak the truth that day, this church won't put a hand over your mouth, he said. We also won't pretend we didn't know what we know now. That was step 1. The pastor wouldn't be their cover anymore. Carla handled the next piece. She drafted a letter to the bank flagging my accounts. No new powers of attorney, no beneficiary changes, no large transfers accepted without my in-person verification. She also made a quiet call to the sheriff's office. I'm not asking you to arrest anybody at the altar, she told the deputy. But there's a man with active civil complaints, and some questionable invoices tied to church funds. It'd be wise to have someone there, plain clothes, if things get spirited. They agreed to send a deputy in a suit, just another guest. That left Julie. I texted her one evening, fingers hovering over the screen longer than I care to admit. I know about the withdrawals. I'm not angry. I'd like to bless your marriage properly. Can we talk alone? She replied within minutes. Of course. Fellowship hall after choir practice tomorrow. We can go over what you'll say. The next night, the hall smelled of coffee and old hymnals. Folding chairs were stacked against the wall. Julie stood by the punch table, phone in hand, face lit by its glow. She looked up when I walked in, guarded but hopeful. Thanks for coming, Dan, she said. Mom's been worried you'd, make things difficult. I don't want to make anything more difficult than it already is, I said. I just want to do this right. She relaxed a fraction. Good, she said. Ethan's parents are so old-fashioned. They'll expect the father of the bride to say something sweet. It'll mean so much to Ethan if you call me your daughter up there. People need to see we're one big happy family. People will see exactly what we are, Julie, I said quietly. Nothing more, nothing less. She didn't quite register that. I told Mom you finally agreed to sign the papers after the wedding. She chattered on. That helps, you know? She's so relieved. Once everything's settled, house in the trust, accounts squared away, we can all breathe. Ray says he's got a big opportunity lined up with one of Ethan's uncles. But it depends on everything looking stable. Ray's counting on this wedding then, I said. She grinned. We all are. I let that sit. I'd like to give a short speech before the vows, I said. Welcome Ethan into the family. Let folks know I support you too. Her eyes lit up. Really? Really? I said. I think it's important people hear from me. From up there. She practically bounced. This is perfect, she said. We'll have Pastor call you up right after the prayer. And, one thing. It'll be less awkward if you sit on the groom's side. Keeps you and Ray from bumping into each other in the pictures. There it was. Arisher, dressed up as etiquette. Whatever you think best, I said. That night, guilt gnawed at me. It's one thing to see numbers and know they're wrong. It's another to stand in front of the whole town and announce it. I sat at Martha's table again, turning my coffee cup in my hands. It feels like I'm about to drag my own family to the stocks, I said. In front of God, no less. Martha stirred sugar into her mug. This building isn't theirs, Dan, she said. It's God's. They chose it as the stage for their story. You didn't. Better the truth be spoken here than lies be blessed here. Carla agreed. They're using the church as camouflage, she said. You're not desecrating anything by pulling the sheet off. You're cleaning house. When I left that night, my steps felt heavier but more certain. The last piece clicked into place quietly. On the Friday before the wedding, I saw a stranger in the back pew at the 8 o'clock service. Suit a little too formal for our small town, eyes that scanned more than they worshipped. Afterward, Carla introduced us. Deputy Harris, she said. He'll be there tomorrow just in case any of Ray's unpaid bills come looking for him. And Harris shook my hand. I'm just there to keep the peace, Mr. Mercer, he said. Whatever form that takes. The night before the wedding, I went back into the sanctuary after the decorators had left. The flowers were in place. Ribbons hung on the pews. The aisle runner was rolled up, waiting. I climbed the 3 steps to the pulpit and stood where I would stand the next day. The empty church smelled of wax and fresh greenery. My voice sounded small when I tested it. My name is Daniel Mercer, I whispered to the shadows. I'm 68 years old, and until this week I thought I had 3 children. The words echoed back softly, as if the building itself were trying them on. I rested my hands on the wood where generations of preachers had laid theirs. I wasn't going up there to curse them, I reminded myself. I wasn't going up there to scream or gloat. I was going up there to read the ledger out loud. The next time I stood in that spot, the pews would be full and the music loud and the stakes higher than they'd ever been in my quiet life. Planning was done. The numbers were ready. All that remained was to step into the light, on the morning of the wedding. Linda woke me up half an hour earlier than I'd planned with the iron already hot and my suit laid out on the bed like a uniform for a battle I hadn't volunteered for. Your tie's wrinkled, she said, holding it up to the light as if that was the greatest crisis facing us. You can't go up there looking disheveled. People will talk. People had been talking for months, but I kept that to myself. I buttoned my white shirt, feeling the stiffness in my fingers. When she stepped in close to loop the tie around my neck, I smelled her perfume and beneath it a sour note of fear. Dan, she whispered, eyes on the knot she was forming, not on me. Please don't cause a scene, not today. Whatever you and Martha and that lawyer talked about, this is Julie's day. I held her wrists gently until she looked up. Linda, I said. We'll let God hear the truth today. Everything else will have to live with that. She pulled her hands back as if I'd burned her. You're going to ruin it, she said, voice breaking. You don't understand what she's been through. What we've all. I understand exactly what I've been through, I said, picking up my jacket. And I'm done pretending it didn't happen. The church parking lot looked like the county fair for Cadillacs and SUVs. Folks I'd never seen darken the doorway. At Christmas were out there in their best clothes, hugging and laughing. As soon as we stepped out of the car, heads turned. "Linda, you look beautiful," someone called. "Where's the bride?" "She's inside," Linda answered automatically, plastering on that brittle smile of hers. "Getting ready?" the mayor said as I passed. "Big day for your girl," I nodded, and he was already moving on. Hand outstretched to the man of the hour standing near the steps. Ray had planted himself by the main entrance, greeting guests like he owned the deed. He wore a black tux that fit him a little better than the last one, but the fake polish was the same. In one hand he shook people's fingers, in the other he slipped business cards like playing cards. "Ray Carlisle Construction," I heard him say. "We do decks, additions, whole house remodels. I'm working on some big projects with Ethan's family. You know how it is when your daughter marrying up," I thought, watching the mayor tuck Ray's card into his pocket and promptly forget it. Interesting phrase from a man living off stolen tithes and my retirement. Linda's arm tightened on mine. "Don't stare," she hissed. "It makes you look jealous." Jealous. That wasn't the word for what I felt. Inside, the sanctuary was buzzing. The choir milled around in robes, trying to look dignified and not like a herd of pastel penguins. Ladies in hats compared corsages. Deacons adjusted their ties. Every few minutes someone would glance my way, smile too wide, and then hurry to whisper to the person next to them. By the side wall, near the usher's station, Martha stood with her collection plates, apron tied over her dress. She caught my eye and gave a small nod that said, "I'm here." Across the aisle, 3 rows back, sat Carla, her hair swept up, a neutral dress making her look like just another cousin. Only the slim folder on her lap gave her away to someone who knew what to look for. I took my assigned seat on the groom's side, near the front but not in the line of honor. Symbolically correct. The man who wasn't quite father, not quite guest. Before the prelude music started, Julie poked her head out from a side door. "Dan," she called softly, "can you come here a sec?" I followed her into a little side room where the choir usually stored robes and spare hymnals. Today it held one nervous bride and the smell of hairspray thick enough to choke a man. She was stunning. There was no denying that. The dress hugged and floated in all the right places, her hair a careful cascade of curls. For a moment, a part of me I thought was dead ached with simple, stupid pride. "You remember Dad?" she said, dabbing at the corner of her eye to fix a mascara smudge. "Keep it short. No sad stories. Just welcome Ethan, bless us, sit down. We want joy today, not your guilt." "I remember," I said. "I won't tell any stories you don't already know." Before she could parse that, the door banged open and Ray strode in, smelling of cologne and nerves. "There's my princess," he boomed, kissing her cheek. Then he clapped me on the back hard enough to make my teeth click. "And there's our man of honor. You ready, Danny boy?" "I'm as ready as I'm going to be." Ray grinned, oblivious. "We're all counting on you," he said. "Family unity sells well in this town. Once this is done and we've got your house squared away, we'll all be looked after." Julie laughed, a bright, brittle sound. "You're finally going to be useful, Dan," she said, picking at a stray thread on her veil. "You get to sign the checks, and I'll handle the image." Those words didn't just sting, they branded. I filed them away with every other line item in this mess. Back in the sanctuary, the organ switched from tinkling warm-up notes to the serious chords of the processional. Guests shuffled to their feet as the bridesmaids glided down the aisle like a row of pastel swans. Ethan and his best man took their place at the front, both looking like boys who'd wandered onto a stage without scripts. Then Linda appeared, walking slowly on the arm of an usher, her silver dress shimmering under the stained glass. She glanced at me as she passed, eyes full of a plea that made my throat tight. I nodded once. It was the closest to mercy I could offer. The congregation rose for the bride. The doors opened, and there she was, Julie on Ray's arm, framed by sunlight and flowers. People oohed and whispered. Cameras flashed. She drank it in like champagne, chin high, smile practiced. Ray puffed his chest out so far I thought the buttons would fly. As they passed my row, Julie's eyes flicked to me. There was no warmth there, only triumph and a warning.
Don't you dare.
The Eisel runner carried them to the altar. Ray placed her hand in Ethan's with exaggerated care, then clapped the younger man's shoulder, leaning in to mutter something that made Ethan flush. He swaggered back to the front pew, winking at Linda on his way. Pastor Mark stepped up, Bible in hand. His voice echoed under the high ceiling. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God, and in the presence of these witnesses, to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. I'd heard those words before, first as a groom, then as a widower clenching his jaw at someone else's happiness, then as a stepfather wiping his eyes when friends' kids grew up. I'd never heard them sound so much like an indictment. He talked about love that bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things. About forsaking all others. About leaving father and mother and cleaving to one another. I thought of bank transfers and lies printed on church letterhead. The words scraped against everything I knew. I glanced back once. Near the last row, Deputy Harris sat, suit jacket unbuttoned, eyes alert but not unkind. Next to him, Carla's fingers tightened on her folder. Martha stood near the side door, hands resting on the collection plates like they were shields. We reached the part of the ceremony where everything usually blurs into vows and rings and applause. Instead, Pastor Mark paused and looked at me. Before we proceed, he said, his voice a touch unsteady, Brother Daniel has asked to share a few words. A hush fell over the sanctuary like somebody had flipped a switch. Linda went pale. Julie's mouth curled into a tight smile, as if to say, remember what we agreed. Ray shifted in his seat, that grin of his faltering just a hair. I stood. My knees didn't buckle. My heart beat a little faster. But it had done that before in board meetings with more zeros on the line than this church would ever see. I walked down the aisle. I'd watched so many people float along. My steps measured, the hem of my suit brushing the white runner. As I passed Martha, she gave a barely perceptible nod. Carla's eyes met mine briefly, steadying. Deputy Harris tilted his head, assessing the room like a man about to direct traffic. I climbed the 3 steps to the pulpit and turned to face them all. 300 faces, all waiting to see whether the old man would bless the happy couple or burst into flames. Pastor Mark stepped back, giving me the microphone. Up close, I could see the tiny tremor in his hand. Brother Daniel has something on his heart to share, he said softly. I wrapped my fingers around the mic, feeling the familiar shape of it. The wood beneath my other hand was warm from the light. In the front pew, Ray leaned back, one arm draped along the back of the bench, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Once you sign those papers, we're all set for life, he'd said not long ago over coffee, thinking I didn't hear the threat inside the promise. Julie met my gaze, her eyes hard. You're not my father, Dan, she had told me in the kitchen days earlier. But you can at least act like one today. I let those words, all of them, settle in my chest one last time. Then I raised the microphone. My name is Daniel Mercer, I said, my voice carrying to the rafters. I'm 68 years old, and I stand here today not as the father of the bride, but as the man she has been trying to erase. For a long heartbeat after I said my name, nobody moved. The air in that sanctuary felt like it had turned to syrup. 300 faces stared back at me, waiting to see if the old man had lost his mind or finally found it. I wasn't always an accountant, I began. Once upon a time, I was just a man with 2 little boys and an aching hole where a wife used to be. Then God handed me a woman with a tired smile and a girl who wouldn't call me anything but Mr. Mercer. A few people smiled faintly, those who remembered. Over the last 25 years, I said, I have bought braces and backpacks and prom dresses. I have sat in emergency rooms and school auditoriums. I have signed tuition checks, signed car loans, and helped with a down payment on an apartment so a young couple could start life on something steadier than air. My voice stayed level, but my hands tightened on the wood. I did it because she called me Dad, I said. Because I believed that made me one. I picked up the sheet of paper Martha had helped me prepare. The numbers looked obscene in black and white. By my rough calculation, I continued, over the years I've spent about $180,000 on Julie's schooling, $30,000 on cars, another $25,000 on rent help, not counting groceries, utilities, and little emergencies. Add in braces, medical bills, and some of Ray's needs that somehow became mine, and we're looking at roughly $250,000. A murmur rose, quickly hushed. That's not a complaint, I said. That's a ledger. Fathers are supposed to give. That's what we do. A father gives out of love. I let the page fall back to the pulpit. But there comes a point, I said quietly, when a man has to ask whether he is a father or just a mark. A father gives out of love. A mark pays out of fear. Today I stopped being your mark. I looked straight at Julie. Under the makeup, she'd gone pale. Last week in my kitchen, I said, Julie told me, and I quote, "You were never my father. You were just the fee." Gasps scattered through the room like dropped hymnals. Older women clutched their purses. One deacon's wife shook her head slowly, as if she'd misheard. "I'm not telling you that to make you pity me," I said. "I'm telling you because if that's the contract she believes we had, then it's time we all know what was purchased with that fee." I turned a second paper around, this one showing a simple table. "Here," I said, "is my retirement account. Here is the line where $40,000 was withdrawn 3 months ago." It was labeled investment. The receiving account belongs to Carla's Home Services, a shell company set up by Ray Carlisle. I shifted my gaze to Ray. He shifted too, deeper into the pew. "Ray has tax liens in 2 counties, I said, lifting Carla's neatly prepared summary. "He has unpaid subcontractors from a deck job gone bad, and at least 1 lawsuit for taking money and not finishing work. He is not building anything but bonfires with other people's savings." I held up a copy of a church check. "This is a check from our benevolence fund," I said, "made out to Carlisle Home Services for plumbing repair at widowed members' home. We have no record of such a widow needing such repair. We do, however, have a record of Linda's signature on that check." All eyes shifted to Linda. She looked like she might slide right off the pew. "There are 2 more checks," I went on, "from a missions fund. Labeled roof patching at parsonage. Our parsonage has been sound for years." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The stone walls carried every word. "I'm not saying this to shame my wife," I said, looking at Linda. "I am saying it because she took the roof over our old age and handed it to the man who once left her with nothing. She believed his stories more than she believed my warnings. If there is shame, it sits on the ones who told those stories, not the one who wanted to believe them." Linda covered her mouth with her hand. Tears gathered in the corners of her eyes. Now I turned back to Julie. "My offering," I said softly. $500 I gave toward this church's roof repair fund. You all remember the drive. We passed the plate, we prayed, we asked God to keep the rain out. I held up the line Martha had shown me. "At Julie's request," I said, "that money was redirected, away from the roof, toward wedding expenses, floral deposit, my teeth to God, rerouted without my consent to pay for hydrangeas." A low, outraged sound rippled through the congregation. "And while she took," I continued, "she told people I was slipping, that I was confused, that I was a danger to my own finances. She printed articles about dementia and waved them like flags while she walked off with my checkbook." Julie shook her head in small frantic motions. "That's not," she started, but her voice cracked and died. "She pressured me to sign a power of attorney that would have given her and her mother control of my house, my accounts, my decisions," I said. "All for my protection." All while laughing with her real father about how, once the wedding was paid for and the house was safe, I could yell all I wanted because the papers would be signed. Ethan's mother put a hand over her heart. Ethan's father's mouth had thinned to a hard line. I turned to Ethan. "Son," I said, "you've asked me if I support this marriage. I can't answer that without telling you who has been supporting whom." He swallowed, eyes never leaving my face. "You were told," I went on, "that Ray was the one who'd always been there. That he was turning his life around. That I was jealous. You were told I was losing my memory. That my objections were confusion, not concern. You were told I was dragging my feet out of spite about signing papers." I raised the folder Carla had prepared on Ray and shook it gently. "The truth is, I've been holding up this family's finances like one of those old farmers holds up a barn," I said. "And while I did, your future father-in-law here was siphoning money from church funds and our retirement to keep his creditors at bay." I nodded toward Deputy Harris at the back. Carla, beside him, gave the slightest signal. Harris stood and walked slowly down the side aisle, trying not to click his heels on the tile. When he reached the front pew, he leaned down, speaking quietly to Ray. "Mr. Carlisle," he murmured, but the microphone picked up the echo. "We need to have a word about some complaints filed regarding your business practices. It'd be best if we spoke outside." Ray shot to his feet. "This is harassment!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "You can't do this here. This is my daughter's wedding. This is God's house," Pastor Mark said calmly from behind me. "And you've been doing this here for quite some time." Ray pointed a shaking finger at me. "He set me up," he yelled. "He's been out to get me since day one. Old Dan should be grateful to have us around. He'd be rotting alone in that house if it weren't for us." People leaned away from him as if his words carried a smell. Harris didn't cuff him. Not yet. He simply guided him toward the side aisle, a firm hand on his elbow. The message was clear: the days of waltzing through people's lives without consequence were over. Back at the altar, the wedding still technically stood. Julie clung to Ethan's arm like a drowning person grabbing a life preserver. "You lied," Ethan said to her, his voice low but audible in the stunned quiet. "You lied to me about who supported you. You lied to me about who was losing his mind. I was protecting us," she babbled. I didn't think." "Dad, please." She looked past Ethan to me, fury and desperation warring in her eyes. "You'd do this to me," she screamed suddenly, voice echoing off stone. "In front of everyone. You'd humiliate me like this." "I didn't bring this into the open, Julie," I said, feeling the years of swallowed words settle. "The day you decided I was just a wallet. The day you moved my tithe to your flower fund. The day you tried to sign my life over to yourself. You did this to yourself when you decided I was just a wallet. I won't go to my grave as an accomplice to your lies." Ethan stepped back, putting a small but infinite distance between them. "I wanted a wife," he said quietly, holding out the ring box. "Not a co-conspirator." She stared at the box, then at him. Her hand shook as she took it, but he didn't close her fingers around it. He simply let go and backed away another step. "If you can do this to the man who raised you," he asked, "what would you have done to me when my back was turned?" Linda made a strangled sound and half stood, only to crumble onto the pew again, clutching at the back for support. The silver of her dress pooled around her like spilled mercy. Pastor Mark closed his Bible slowly. He stepped to the microphone, his face sorrowful but clear. "Friends," he said, "what we've just heard is painful. But sometimes the most loving thing truth can do is stop a bad promise before it's made. This ceremony cannot go on today as if these things were not said. As pastor of this church, I am halting these proceedings." A collective exhale sighed through the room, half relief, half disappointment. "We will be investigating," he continued, "any misuse of funds entrusted to this church. Those who wish to stay and pray may do so. Those who feel the need to go may go with our blessing. But we will not pretend all is well when it plainly is not." He stepped back. For a moment, no one moved. Then the whispering began. Some people glared at me, offended that I dared spoil their Saturday entertainment. Others nodded grimly, faces lined with empathy or a hard satisfaction. Deputy Harris guided Ray out one side door, still protesting. Linda sank the rest of the way into the pew, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Julie stood alone on the steps of the altar, dress spread out in a ruined cloud, mascara carving black rivers down her cheeks. She watched Ethan walk toward his parents. Watched them close ranks around him. Watched them lead him down the aisle and out into the light. She watched me as I stepped away from the pulpit, down the same steps she dreamed of gliding past as a bride. Our eyes met for a heartbeat. "I loved you," I thought, and knew saying it out loud would help no one. I walked down the center aisle under a rain of whispers. About time someone said something. He went too far. I'd have done worse. Outside, the sky had clouded over, gray and flat. The parking lot buzzed with confused, angry, relieved voices. Behind me, the big wooden doors of Grace Hill swung shut with a hollow boom. I hadn't planned to feel anything but vindication. Instead, as I stepped out into the parking lot, away from the blue lights and the scattered petals, what I felt most was empty. I'd kept my dignity. I'd finally closed the Bank of Daniel Mercer. But I walked out of that church lonelier than I had ever been. The question now was simple and terrible. What kind of life could I build from the pieces I had left? 6 months after I walked out of Grace Hill under a cloud of whispers and lily petals, the town had found new gossip. That's the way it goes. Your earthquake becomes yesterday's weather. But for the people in the middle of it, the aftershocks last a lot longer. Ray was the first to go. Deputy Harris and Carla didn't haul him off in cuffs that day. But they did not forget him either. The civil complaints about his construction company turned into judgments. Subcontractors came forward with stories of checks that bounced higher than their ladders. The county looked into the church funds he'd received and did not like what they saw. He took a plea on a couple of small fraud charges, avoided real prison, but the damage was done. His business license was revoked. Word got around. In a small town, reputation is currency, and his was suddenly counterfeit. One morning I heard he'd packed up what little he had and slunk off to a cousin's trailer 3 counties over. The only thing he left behind was a trail of IOUs and a daughter standing in ashes. The wedding, of course, never happened. Ethan moved on quietly. No dramatic rebound, no splashing photos online. I saw him once at the hardware store with a young woman from the next church over. They were comparing paint colors, talking about a little house they'd just bought together. He saw me, walked over, and shook my hand. "You did the right thing, Mr. Mercer," he said. I didn't like it then. I was angry. "But you saved me." I told him I hoped he'd build something honest. Judging by the way he looked at that girl, simple dress, no diamonds, eyes full of kindness, I think he will. Julie took longer to hit the ground. The vendors still wanted to be paid. The dress wasn't returnable. The photographer kept his deposit. Ethan's parents refused to cover the costs. The castle she'd built on my savings and Ray's promises crumbled, and when the dust settled she was left with a pile of bills and a name people said carefully. She moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, then into an even smaller one when the first job fell through. The last I heard, she was working double shifts at a diner off the highway, coming home with sore feet and no one waiting to pick up the tab. Every so often my phone buzzes with a message from her. "Got a second job. I'm trying." Or "I'm sorry. I know it's not enough." I read them. I answer with a simple, "I hope you're taking care of yourself." I don't add, "On your own dime." I don't offer money. Love, maybe someday. Not cash. Linda and I did not survive that day as husband and wife. At first, she tried to act like we could patch it all up if we just didn't say the word wedding out loud. But you can't live in a house where half the roof has been given away and pretend it isn't raining. Counseling didn't help. She wanted me to apologize for airing our dirty laundry. I wanted her to admit she'd hung it out over my grave. In the end, we signed papers, this time with full understanding of what each line meant. She moved into a rented duplex near the edge of town, took a part-time job at the pharmacy, and started learning what a budget looks like without my paycheck plugged into it. I don't hate her. I pity the part of her that was always more afraid of losing people than of losing herself. But I won't be her safety net anymore. With Carla's help, I sold the big house. Too many memories in those walls, some sweet, some sour, all heavy. The sale cleared the remaining debt and left me with a solid chunk of retirement intact. I bought a small brick cottage 15 minutes from the church, just big enough for me and an extra bed when my sons visit. They visit more now. Mark drives in with his wife and kids a few times a year. Tyler times his trucking routes so he can park the rig outside town and borrow my old truck for a weekend. They slap me on the back, call me old man, and say they're proud I finally said no. "You should have done it sooner," Tyler told me once, flipping burgers in my tiny backyard. "But I'm glad you did it at all." I used some of the money I'd been hoarding for a fantasy of family togetherness, and did something practical with it. At Martha's urging, we set up a modest scholarship at Grace Hill in my first wife's name for kids who want to go to trade school or community college, but can't afford that first step. No fancy essays, no bloodline requirement. Just hard workers. We also started a small emergency fund for seniors in town, the folks on fixed incomes who find themselves choosing between medicine and heat. Martha administers it with the same righteous suspicion she always brought to the co-op's ledgers. If someone tries to abuse it, She'll spot them before they hit the parking lot. I spent decades thinking I was building a fortune for my kids. I realized one evening, watching her write a check for a widow's overdue electric bill. In the end, that fortune nearly cost me my freedom. These days, my riches look different. A quiet porch, a coffee mug that nobody refills without asking, a stack of legal documents that have my signature and nobody else's scribbled over it. I walk past Grace Hill most evenings. Sometimes the choir is practicing, voices rising imperfect but earnest. Sometimes the building is dark, the stained glass a patchwork of shadow. I sit in the back pew from time to time, not because I like to relive that day, but because I like to remember what telling the truth felt like in a place meant for it. Once in a while, at the early service, I spot Julie. She comes in late, sits on the far side in the back, head bowed. She slips out during the last hymn while everyone's eyes are closed. We haven't spoken face to face since the wedding that wasn't. I pray for her. Not that she'll get rich, not that she'll come crawling back. I pray she'll learn the difference between love and leverage, between repentance and self-pity. What I don't do is reach for my wallet. Blood might decide who shares your last name, but it doesn't decide who respects you. Greed turns children into strangers long before the law or the church ever step in. Money can be rebuilt. A ruined conscience cannot. Pastor Mark told me recently that Julie wants to talk things out. I agreed to meet her for coffee at the diner off the highway. Public place. Neutral ground. I'll go with nothing in my pockets but my keys and a small folded napkin with notes to myself. If she asks for forgiveness, I'll offer it. I'm too close to meeting my maker not to travel light. If she asks for money, I'll say no. Simple as that. I'm open to reconciliation of hearts, not accounts. I've closed the Bank of Daniel Mercer. It's staying closed. Now, let me ask you something. If your own child, or stepchild, tried to take your freedom and everything you worked for, would you still protect them? Or would you choose justice, even if it meant watching them fall? Has anyone ever treated you like a wallet instead of a person? How did you handle it? Do you believe blood alone makes someone family, or is family the people who stand beside you when the money is gone? If you think no father should be told he was never a real parent, after paying the price of one, tap that like button so I know I'm not alone out here. Subscribe to Dad Revenge Tales and share your story in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from, and whether you think I went too far or not far enough.